I'm Kelly Marlowe of Fiddly Photography. I'm based in Edmonton, Alberta, and I am primarily a newborn and family photographer. I sometimes also do some boudoir for mothers. But I wanted to show you today how I would edit a newborn image because I do the majority of my work in my clients' homes, and I do all of my newborn sessions in clients' homes. And I would say they're a mix of lifestyle and documentary. I do a bit of posing, usually just with the baby alone. For example, right here, this baby is swaddled up and I just placed her on the bed. And that's usually as posed as I get in my sessions. So I wanted to just give you a quick run through of how I would edit this image from scratch. I'm not going to use any presets. We'll go through all of the panels, and then I'll also write it all out so that you have the steps if you want to go back and do it yourself. Okay, so let's get started. I'll give you a quick rundown of this image. This was taken in the client's master bedroom, and over here to the left was a big bay window, and then over here to the right was the door going out to the hallway. So my main light source was coming in from over here on the left. So I wrapped the baby up and then I put her on the bed with her head facing the window. I shoot with a Nikon D750, and you can see my settings here where I was at 320. So it was really pretty bright in the room, ISO 320. And I was shooting with my 24-70, my Nikon 24-70 2.8, which is on my camera 95% of the time. It's by far my favorite lens, and I use it, I keep it on through the whole session, and I always have it on in family sessions and in newborn sessions. So here I was at 29 millimeters, probably because, if I remember correctly, there was actually an ironing board behind me, and I couldn't back up any further. So I just zoomed out as much as I could to get the whole bed. And then I was at 1:160. Now, that's a low shutter speed, and if there had been anybody else in this frame, I would not have been that low. But because it was just me and the baby, I could steady myself, take a breath, and then take that shot without it getting blurry at the 1:160. So I do edit fairly clean. I like to have a bit of shadow in my work though, and I do often use the CM Garden presets, but today I'm going to walk you through how to do this from scratch in case you don't have any presets. Okay, so this is my image, straight out of camera, completely reset, so there's nothing being applied to it right now. And so we'll just go through the panels, and then I tend to kind of go back and forth as I edit and if I need to adjust things. So right now you can see that it's, the white balance is as shot. I shoot in auto white balance all the time, and it doesn't usually let me down, especially if it's all natural light. So this right now is at, and I do shoot in raw, this right now is at 5700. For the temperature, and it put the tint at +10. So this looks pretty good to me right now. I'm not going to fiddle with it, and I might come back later and adjust it if needed, but right now we'll just leave it right where it is. So I'm going to focus right now on the baby's face, and then we'll adjust as needed from there. So I'm just going to pull up the exposure a little bit to get the baby's face where I want it. So I'll just zoom in a little bit so that you can see her little face. And then I am going to pull the highlights up just slightly. Let's zoom back out here. And I like the shadows like I mentioned, so I'm going to pull the shadows down, and since there's like not any huge shadows on her face right here, it's not going to affect. If I pull those shadows down, it's really affecting the outside edges right here. I'm going to pull the whites up just a little bit. I don't want to blow out this swaddle right here. So you can, if you hover over these little arrows, it'll show you what is clipped or what is blown, or you can also hit J on your keyboard. And so you can see here where the red is right here on these lamps. So this is showing that these highlights are blown out, which is like not a big deal to me that the lamps are blown out, but nothing on her swaddle is blown out. So we're good to go. So I'll just hit J again, and it's going to go away. And you can tell that that's on because there's little white boxes around the histogram up here. Okay, so we left off at the whites, and now I'm going to pull the blacks down because it adds just a little bit of definition. So we'll start there. Now I always increase my vibrance by at least 10 just to give it a little pop. And sometimes then I go up more or I fiddle with the saturation, especially if skin tones are feeling a little too saturated, then I kind of just pull it down a little bit. But I generally tend to leave that vibrance. And this is actually looking really good right now. Okay, so that first panel is all done, the basic panel. Now let's move down to the tone curve. And if you don't have a tone curve right now with these little points that you can grab right here, you're probably seeing this with these sliders. So if you have these sliders, it's not going to let you manipulate this tone curve, and we want to manipulate the tone curve. So if this is what you're seeing right now, you need to click this little box down here. Okay, then those sliders are going to go away, and you're going to get this tone curve that you can click and grab, and you can put points on. And this is where the magic is going to happen. So to the left is your shadows, to the right is your highlights, and you can see your histogram, just like up here, is underlaid there. So you can see it just a little bit. So I tend to always grab a point just in like the first quarter. And so you can see, so if we push that, there go all the shadows, right? They're gone. And if you pull it down all the way, it's like super contrasty and shadowy. So a little goes a long way with the tone curve. I just pull it down just a little bit. And we might come back and adjust this, but for now that looks good. So you can see that it increased all my shadows. So now what I want to do is push my midtones back up. And if you're confused on where to go for your midtones in your image, look at this histogram that's underneath here and grab where the majority of the data is. That's what I tend to do as a starting point. So for me, you can see the majority of the data is right here. So I'm going to just grab, all you do is click, and you'll get a little point, and then you can push it up. Okay, so that's looking good to me. And I'm going to just touch J on my keyboard again to make sure there's nothing blown. So now you can see we still have these points here that are blown. And now you can see the blue that just showed up, which is showing me where it's clipped, which means we've lost all the details in the shadows and the blacks. But this is like not in the important part of this shot. So I'm going to leave this and it's totally fine. And I don't really care that that's clipped back there. Okay, so I'm going to hit J again to get that to go away. Okay, so this is looking pretty good. I'm liking that. Now, I'm not going to play around with this HSL panel. And if you're not seeing all three panels like I have right now, it's probably because you have it just clicked up here with like hue, saturation, or luminance. I always keep mine on all because I like to just fiddle around with all of them and have them all there. So what I am going to do, and what I tend to do to all of my images, is I pull down the red saturation just a little bit, and I pull down the orange saturation just a little bit again. And this is what I tend to come back and tweak after I'm done editing for the most part, and I'll think, oh, their skin's just a little bit too orange, or often this is what I come back to instead of, if I'm struggling with just a face or skin tone, this is where I'll come back before I go back up here to white balance, because I find that it's just easier to deal with this in tiny little movements. Okay, so I pulled down the red saturation. Let's just make them both -5, just why not? And then the luminance, there's always a lot of orange in Caucasian skin. And so what I tend to do is push up the luminance, and you can see the difference. So if you look at the baby's face, like if we were to pull this way down, and then if we pull it up, it basically like brightens it up. It illuminates that specific color. Okay. So babies, and I work primarily with babies, tend to be red because newborn babies are red or orange. So see, you can see if we push it, like it makes her ghost-like, which we don't want to do. But I'll put it somewhere around like +10. That looks good. Now, if this isn't working for you, or you're confused on what color it is, or you're dealing with a different skin tone, a good way to do that is to see this little button that's right here. Click it, and then you're going to get this little tool that has a cross and the little arrows, and you put it over what you want to change. So let's just say we wanted to change baby's face. So we're going to click, and then you either move your mouse or your finger, if you're on a trackpad, up to increase it, and you can see over here what it just did. So this baby's face is mostly red and orange. Or click and pull it down to decrease it. Okay, so if you're confused and it's not working and you're like, I don't know what color luminance I want to change or what color saturation, that's a way to start you off. Okay, so I'm going to click on that again and get rid of it. And we're going to push this up to, I think let's do 8. Looks good. Okay, moving down to split toning, I am leaving this alone. I don't, this adds color to either your highlights or your shadows, and I don't tend to use it very much unless I'm really struggling with color casts. Then sometimes I'll add it to the highlights, especially if you have like iridescent lights overhead. Then sometimes what you can do is add a color to the highlight to counteract that yellow light that's coming in. Okay, moving on to the detail. Lightroom automatically sharpens a little bit. I like to use this masking. It's not overly sharp. It just does certain edges, and it makes everything pop just a little bit. So if you hold down the Alt on your keyboard, you can see what the sharpening is going to do. So if we were to do like radius, you can see that it does the main lines in the image. See where it's becoming darker and darker? Put that back. And if you were to do detail, and I'm holding down Alt again, if you were to do detail now, you can see that it's not doing the main lines. You can't see much because there's not much in here, but it's not doing the main lines, it's doing the smaller, finer lines. Okay, so we'll push this back down. Okay, so I'm going to do masking, and I like to pull it way up. Like we're going to go to 80. So it's not major, it's just a tiny little shift, and I find it makes my subjects just pop a little bit and make everything just look a little bit sharper. Okay, noise reduction, down here, moving on. I tend to put this at 10 just because it smooths out everything just a little bit. And this is at ISO 320, so I really have no noise in this image, and I'll zoom in so you can see. Like you can see, there's very little noise there. But if I had an image that was really high ISO, that was really noisy, then I would push this. I don't tend to go over 20, but you can play around with it if you need noise reduction. I think sometimes we worry too much about noise. Okay, moving down to lens correction. Now, I tend, especially because when I shoot on my 24-70, when I'm out at the 24 range, 20 to 35, 24 to 35 range, I get a lot of vignetting and I do get some distortion. So if we click this enable profile corrections, Lightroom is going to apply the settings that go with the lens that should be in your metadata, and it knows what to do to fix that. So you can see if we do that again. So you can see how it took that vignette off the corners a little bit, just kind of brightened it all up. Now, you can also click the remove chromatic aberration if you tend to be, this tends to happen a lot if you're backlighting. You'll get like a little blue line or a purple line around the edges, generally of faces, sometimes of like trees and things like that too. So you can click that and then you can play around with it in the manual mode. But we don't have any of that today, so we're going to leave that. Okay, moving on to the transform. Now, I don't know about you, but I never shoot straight. It doesn't happen ever. So nothing is perfectly straight. I tend to start with the auto. So this is going to, Lightroom is going to think about it and try and balance everything out and straighten it out. So it looks at the lines that are in the picture and tries to figure it out. So we can click auto and see what happens. And for this image, it didn't do it. What I'm thinking is that this line here isn't strong enough for Lightroom to figure out what's going on. So let's take it off, because all it did was just tilt it a little bit. after that, when that doesn't work for me, then I tend to go to this upright right here. So you can see this little like grid crisscross tic-tac-toe looking thing. Click on that and you're going to get this tool. Now what this allows you to do is to draw where you want the straight lines in the image. So I want this headboard to be straight. So I'm going to take it, draw across the headboard and let go. Now it needs 2 lines to figure out what should be straight, okay, and how it should change it. So you can do one vertical and one horizontal and one vertical. In this case, I'm going to do 2 horizontal because I want these lines to both be straight. And then we'll give it some time and you can see it just pulled it up, okay? Now if I wanted to, and I don't really have another line in here, like I could say, so now see this end table over here is being pushed off, so I could do another horizontal and see if it fixes it. Sometimes it can't do it. There's no way for it to do it. And this is okay because, see, I think that just tilted. We're going to delete that line. Let's try and get this straight. See if it does it. No, it's having a hard time with this image. And I don't like how that's not, see how, so as soon as we put these lines in, she like is now sliding off this bed. So let's just get rid of these. And instead I'm going to go to my crop and I'm just going to straighten it and be done with it. And you'll see later why I don't really care about the end boards or the end tables. And while we're here cropping, let's just get this in line here. Okay, so I want the baby to be in the middle, but I also want the headboard to be centered. And I didn't quite get her in the middle here. So I'm going to worry more about the headboard. So you can see here with this line, it's centered, and here with this line, it's centered. And then her face is pretty much in the middle. So that's looking good. And I want the space above the bed. So I'm going to pull this up. And I don't love that this corner is in here, but I'm going to deal with that later. Okay, so let's go with that. It's still looking a little crooked to me. Just a tiny little shift there. Okay, cool. So we're done with the transform. It didn't help us today, but if you are ever stuck on getting things straight, that's usually the method I go. Try auto first. If that doesn't work, try grabbing this little tool. And if that doesn't work, you can still play around with all of these. Okay, I'm going to ignore the vignette. I don't care because I'm going to work on that later and I will show you. The other thing you can do is this is, I really like using this blue primary down here. It tends to boost skin tones. Now, just like the tone curve, a little goes a long way, so be cautious. But if you watch her face as I pull up this saturation, it's just going to give it, I'm going to go to 10. It's just going to give it a little tiny, like, it just bumps up that skin tone. And so you can see, like, if we go all the way over here, it's making her, like, Oompa Loompa-ish. And all the way down, then it's pulling all the saturation out. So I just tend to go, let's do 10. And then if you want to change the hue in it, you can too. So if we move this to the left, it's making her really red, and to the right, it's going to make her really green. Another good way sometimes to deal, if you're really struggling with skin tones because of mixed lighting, that's a good way to handle it. So we'll just leave that at +2. That looks good. Okay, so now we're going to go all the way back up. We've made all our basic adjustments. This is looking really good. We could leave this technically right now. Like, this wouldn't be horrible if you were doing a personal image and you wanted to be done. And I know this took a long time for me to go through, but when I go through this would be like a 5-minute edit without me talking through all of it. Now, they have all their diapers and everything set up here. I kind of like that. I actually think it adds to the story, but I don't want you to look at the baby and then look back and be like, oh, what's on that nightstand over there? So we're going to just take some of the attention away from that. And I also want to pull some more attention to the baby. So we are going to go up here in your tools to the radial filter. Now what you do is you get this cross and you click and you drag and it's going to make a circle. We're going to pull this circle over the baby. This made more of an oval. We're going to make it into like a circle. It's just all clicking and dragging, and you can adjust it after the fact. Okay. Now we have this radial filter, and the default in Lightroom is that what you're gonna make adjustments to is going to happen on the outside of the radial filter. If you want it to happen on the inside of the radial filter, you click this over here, invert mask, and that means whatever you fiddle with in here is going to change inside, but we want to work on the outside. So I had it set, my default just went to burn, which means darken, and that's fine because that's what we're going to do. So we're going to pull down this exposure. And we're going to pull down the highlights, and we're going to pull down the shadows. And you can, if it's not enough still, pull down the blacks just a little bit, but you don't want to make it like too black. I'm going to do the shadows more. Okay, so that's looking pretty good, but I'm just going to make this actually a little bit smaller of an oval. Okay. And then I like how these shadows are looking. I like how we've darkened this up over here. But what I tend to do when I darken things is go back up to the temperature and increase the temperature to just warm it up a bit. Because as soon as you add shadows, to me, it starts to feel cool. Okay. So there we go. So we're at +9, and then we've pulled that down almost to 1, and I pulled the highlights down, shadows down, blacks down just slightly. And if I hit O on my keyboard or over here where it says Show Selected Mask Overlay, you can see where it's red is what has been affected in the image. So if you look at the baby, nothing's been touched on her. And I have my feather set to 50. That's pretty standard. But if you wanted to, let's say, if it was looking like it was too harsh of a line, you can play around with this feather and increase it so that it just feathers in that radial filter a little bit nicer. Okay. So I would say right now, this is looking really good. And if I wasn't as picky as I am, I would leave this just like this. Actually, I think I would pull down my red saturation just a little bit because her face is just looking a little bit red. Maybe push up that luminance, that red luminance a little bit. Okay. But this is annoying me. And part of this is because I was there and I didn't catch it, but there is a bump under this. And this is all, like when I look at the baby, now I just see this bump under the duvet. A few shots after this, I fixed it, but I like this shot of the baby better. So I'm going to fix this in post. So we could try it in Lightroom to grab your clone, and we're just going to brush it on. It's set to heal over here. And let's just like see what it does. Let's move it. So we're going to, you move it around to pick a spot that you like. And we'll do this line. We'll do this line. Well, it's thinking there, so I'll take that away so you can see. So that actually did pretty good. I'm not loving this one right here. Let's move it a little closer. Okay. That looks pretty good. That did it. You can still see there's a little bit of a line here, but it's not a big deal. And I could pull this into Photoshop, but honestly, I think we can fix it here in Lightroom. So I'm just going to go around and just do a few of the... So sometimes if I have something that's a bit more complicated, I pull it into Photoshop and I use like content aware to fill, or I will like use a cloning and then paint it on. But I think that this will do it here. And let's just do down here and see if we can get this to smooth out a little bit. Okay. Okay, so now I've got a whole bunch of spots, but really they're pretty all quick edits or quick cloning. We're going to leave that. Then what I'm going to do is grab a graduated filter, which is this square little rectangle, and you click and drag up so you can see. Now the more you have, the wider you have this, the more graduated it's going to come into the image. The closer you have it, and let's make it dark just so you can see what it's doing. So see, I've pulled the exposure way down. So it's doing everything to this side of the filter. And because I have it really small right here, it's making a big line. And if I increase it, you see it spreads it all out. Okay, so we're not going to darken this. This isn't what we want to do. I want to pull down the clarity a little bit and the sharpness a lot. And actually, I'm going to pull down the contrast too. And then we're going to darken it a little bit because as soon as we pulled down the contrast, it just brightened it up. We're going to warm it up again, just like I did with the radial filter. And then if you go back near the little middle point, you'll get the little, you see it goes from the cross to the arrows with both ends. We're going to turn this. That's too warm. Okay, I'm just going to pull down the highlights there. I'm going to pull down the exposure a little bit more. I don't want it to look bright. Like I really don't want it to look like I did anything. The goal here is to just pull down that sharpness so that you see less of the wrinkles. Okay, hit enter. And that's looking good. Maybe let's do one more, just coming in from this side. Just to kind of decrease these wrinkles. Pull down the contrast again. Okay. There we go. Okay, so this, I would say that this is done. So let me make a virtual copy. You can just right click on your little thumbnail and create a virtual copy. And I'm going to reset this one. And we're going to do a little compare. So this was my straight out of camera. And if you select both and hit C on your keyboard, at some point when my computer is done thinking, you'll see. So on the left is the beginning image, the straight out of camera image, and on the right is my final edited image. And we can go back here, make it full screen. So there's the straight out of camera, and there's the edit. So straight out of camera and edit. I will write out all these steps. If you have any questions, just leave them in the comments below and I will come back and answer. Thank you.